For 6 years, his daughter never said a single word, not daddy, not even a whisper. Doctors had no answers until the day he walked past the playroom and froze. The voice he heard wasn't just hers, it was the sound of a miracle. And it came from singing with their new nanny. Daddy, daddy. The words sliced through the quiet air like a lightning bolt. David Harris froze mid-step in the marble hallway of his mansion. For a second, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But no, he had heard it. A child's voice. High, sweet, and trembling with excitement. And that voice, it was unmistakable. It was Lily's. For 6 long years, David, one of the wealthiest men in the city, had lived with a quiet ache in his chest. An ache born from the fact that his only daughter had never spoken a single word. Not hi, not bye, not daddy. Doctors had examined her from head to toe. They ran test after test, poked and prodded, scanned and analyzed. Every result came back the same. She was perfectly healthy. No hearing problems. No issues with her vocal cords. No brain damage. The medical term was selective mutism. But to David, it just felt like a cruel mystery. His daughter's lips could move, but her voice was trapped somewhere deep inside. Therapists tried to reach her. Specialists offered new methods. David paid for the best of the best. But Lily's eyes remained distant, her little hands gripping her favorite stuffed bunny, while the world waited for her to speak. And on that warm afternoon, walking past the sunlit playroom, David wasn't expecting anything different. But then that voice. He stopped, his pulse quickening. Slowly, he stepped closer to the half-open door. Inside, the scene was nothing like he'd imagined. There was Lily sitting cross-legged on the plush carpet, holding hands with their new nanny, Grace. The two of them were swaying gently from side to side, their eyes closed as they sang a soft lullaby. David recognized neither the tune nor the language. It was foreign, lilting, and warm, wrapping around the room like a blanket. And there was Lily, his Lily, her tiny lips moving with the music. And then a sound he had never heard before. Laughter. Real, unrestrained, joyful laughter. It hit David harder than any business deal, any award, any success he'd ever achieved. His breath caught, and he gripped the doorframe, as if afraid that if he blinked, the moment would vanish. For 6 years, his home had been filled with silence. Yes, there had been footsteps, the soft rustle of toys, the hum of the house staff, but never his daughter's voice. And now here it was, fragile, trembling, but alive. He didn't want to interrupt, so he stayed still, just listening. Grace's voice was rich and deep, like warm honey. She sang with her whole heart, her body swaying to the rhythm. Lily matched her movements, giggling when Grace exaggerated a note. David remembered the day Grace first arrived. She was nothing like the other nannies, the ones who wore stiff uniforms and followed strict schedules. Grace had arrived in a simple floral dress, a colorful scarf tied around her hair, and a smile that felt like sunshine. He hadn't been sure about her at first. She didn't have a prestigious resume or training certificates from expensive schools. She was recommended by a friend of his late wife, Caroline. Grace doesn't just take care of children, the friend had said. She understands them. Back then, David wasn't looking for understanding. He was looking for results. But now, watching this scene, he realized he had been wrong. Grace didn't try to pull Lily out of her shell by force. She didn't bombard her with questions or instructions. She simply sat with her, humming softly, offering her presence like a safe harbor. And somehow it worked. The song came to an end, and Grace opened her eyes, smiling at Lily. "Your turn, little one," she said gently. Lily hesitated, glancing toward the door, and that's when she saw him. Her eyes widened. For a moment, David thought she would retreat back into silence. His heart pounded. But then, something incredible happened. Her face lit up. She scrambled to her feet, her little socks sliding on the carpet, and ran straight toward him. "Daddy, Daddy," she squealed, throwing her arms around his legs. The words were clear, ringing, and more beautiful than any music he had ever heard. David dropped to his knees, hugging her tightly, unable to stop the tears that spilled from his eyes. "Lily, you spoke," he whispered, his voice breaking. Grace stood in the background, her expression soft. "She's had it in her all along," she said. "She just needed to feel safe enough to let it out." David pulled back to look at Lily's face, flushed from singing, eyes sparkling with pride. "Say it again," he begged. She grinned. "Daddy." He laughed, the sound shaky. "One more time." "Daddy," she shouted, giggling, before burying her face in his shoulder. From that day on, the mansion was never silent again. Lily's voice filled every corner, sometimes with songs, sometimes with questions, sometimes with silly, made-up words. Grace became more than just a nanny. She was family. She taught Lily songs from her own childhood, told her stories about stars and rivers and faraway lands. And David? He stopped working late every night. He learned some of Grace's lullabies, even though his voice cracked on the high notes. He took Lily to the park, to the zoo, to the little ice cream shop downtown. Every time she called Daddy, it still felt like a miracle. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, David found Grace in the kitchen making tea. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. Grace smiled. "You don't have to. Just keep listening to her. She's got a lot to say now." David chuckled. "I think I can do that." And as he walked upstairs, he heard Lily's small voice singing softly to her stuffed bunny. It was the sweetest sound in the world. Lily had been a mystery since the day she was born. Most babies made themselves known to the world with loud cries, announcing their arrival. But not Lily. She came into the world quietly, eyes wide open, gazing around as if she had already seen it all before. At first, the nurses thought it was charming. "Such a calm baby," they told David and Caroline. But over the weeks, they began to notice something unusual. Lily's cries, when they came at all, were soft and short-lived. She didn't fuss the way other infants did. She didn't make those cooing, babbling sounds that parents love to hear. By her first birthday, other children were starting to say Mama and Dada. Lily said nothing. David tried to make it a game. He would lean over her crib, smiling wide. "Say Daddy," he'd encourage, repeating it slowly. Caroline would do the same with Mama, her voice gentle and warm. But Lily would just stare at them, her big brown eyes unblinking, as if she was looking straight through to something they couldn't see. When she was 2, the concern grew into worry. Caroline insisted they see a pediatrician. The doctor examined Lily carefully, but found nothing wrong. Her hearing was perfect. Her mouth, tongue, and vocal cords were normal. "She's just a late talker," the doctor assured them. "Some children take longer. She'll speak when she's ready." But later never seemed to come. By the time Lily was 3, David and Caroline had visited specialists all over the country. Neurologists, child psychologists, speech therapists. They traveled to big city hospitals, famous clinics, and quiet private practices hidden in leafy suburbs. They sat in waiting rooms filled with toys and picture books, listening to experts explain theories. Every test ended the same way, with confusion. "There's no physical problem," they'd say. "Her voice works. She can hear. But something emotional is holding her back." Speech therapists tried to draw Lily out. They sat on colorful mats, using puppets and picture cards, making silly animal noises. They coaxed, they sang, they played. But Lily stayed silent, watching them with that same unreadable expression. Her eyes seemed to hold 1,000 thoughts, none of which she would share. David and Caroline tried to stay hopeful. They told themselves that one day, the words would come. But then, tragedy struck. 2 years ago, Caroline passed away unexpectedly. It was sudden, cruel, and it shattered their family. One day, she was there, holding Lily in her arms. The next, she was gone. David's grief was unlike anything he had ever experienced. As a businessman, he was used to fixing problems, solving crises, making things happen. But this was a wound no amount of money or control could heal. He told himself he had to stay strong for Lily, that he had to provide for her, the same phrase he repeated in boardrooms when explaining why he couldn't take time off. He poured himself into his work, expanding his empire, making more deals, earning more money. But the truth was uglier. He was hiding from the quiet of the house, without Caroline's laughter, hiding from the way Lily's silence now felt heavier than ever, hiding from the fact that his little girl had lost her mother and seemed further away than ever before. He hired nannies, the best his wealth could find. Polished women in pressed uniforms, armed with glowing resumes and flawless references. They came with detailed schedules, healthy meal plans, and books about child development. They were polite, efficient, and professional. But they didn't last. One by one they left. Some stayed a few months, others only a few weeks. Their reasons varied: personal matters, other opportunities. But David could read between the lines. They couldn't connect with Lily. It wasn't that she was difficult. She didn't throw tantrums or refuse to eat. She simply kept her distance. She would sit quietly while the nanny read her a story, never reacting. She would play alone, her stuffed bunny always in her lap, her expression unreadable. She would walk beside them when they went out, but never take their hand unless prompted. It was as if she lived in a glass bubble. You could see her, even be close to her, but you could never reach her. Sometimes David would stand in the doorway of her room, watching her play. She would hum softly to herself, a tune without words, her little fingers arranging blocks in neat, perfect lines. He would feel a pang in his chest, a desperate wish to break through whatever wall was between them. He tried to talk to her, to draw her out. But after a while, his attempts grew less frequent. It hurt too much to be met with silence. And so the mansion became a place of quiet routines. The staff came and went. Meals were eaten in near silence. The days blurred together. In public, David wore his usual confident smile, the image of a successful millionaire. But behind closed doors, he was a man who felt powerless in the one place that mattered most, his own home. And Lily, she stayed the same, small, silent, untouchable. No one could have guessed that all of that was about to change, not with another expensive therapist, not with a new fancy program, but with a woman named Grace, who would step into their lives and do something no one else had managed. She would give Lily her voice back. Grace was different from the very beginning. She didn't come from one of those high-end nanny agencies that David usually used, the kind with glossy brochures and staff trained in etiquette, nutrition, and child psychology. No, Grace was recommended by an old friend of Caroline's, someone David hadn't spoken to much since the funeral. She's warm, patient, and has a way with children, the friend had said. It's not something you can teach, it's just who she is. David almost said no. After all, he didn't want warm and patient. He wanted results. He wanted someone who could somehow unlock Lily's silence, something a dozen other professionals had failed to do. But something in the friend's voice made him pause. Maybe it was loyalty to Caroline's memory. Maybe it was desperation. Whatever it was, he agreed to meet her. When Grace arrived at the Harris mansion for the first time, she didn't look like the nannies who came before her. She didn't wear the crisp navy uniforms with polished shoes and a perfectly pinned bun. Instead, she wore a long flowing skirt in deep red, a soft yellow blouse, and a scarf wrapped around her hair in intricate folds. Her smile was wide and warm, and her eyes, a rich deep brown, seemed to look right into you. Her voice was the first thing David noticed when she spoke. It was low and steady, with a rhythm that made you want to lean in and listen. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that came from experience, not from a resume. Still, David remained skeptical. He led her into the living room, where Lily sat on the floor with her stuffed bunny, stacking wooden blocks. The previous nannies had always tried the same approach: big smiles, enthusiastic voices, toys thrust into Lily's hands, or a barrage of questions. What's your name? How old are you? Can you say hello? Lily never responded. Sometimes she would look away. Other times, she would simply pick up her bunny and walk to another room. Grace, however, didn't do any of that. She didn't speak to Lily at all, not at first. She simply lowered herself onto the carpet a few feet away, moving slowly so she didn't startle her. She sat cross-legged, smoothed her skirt, and began humming softly. It was a tune David didn't recognize, low, steady, and full of gentle rises and falls. It carried a strange mix of melancholy and comfort, like the sound of rain on a warm roof. After a moment, Grace began to sing. The words were in a language David didn't know, flowing together like water. There was something earthy and rich about it, a lilting African dialect that seemed to wrap itself around the room. Lily glanced up. Not for long, just a quick flicker of her eyes toward Grace. But David noticed. Grace didn't acknowledge the glance. She kept singing, her voice even and unhurried. She picked up a block and set it down gently in front of her, almost as if she were playing alongside Lily, without asking to join. For the rest of that first day, Lily didn't move closer. She didn't speak, didn't mimic, didn't do anything different. But she also didn't leave. When David peeked into the room later, Lily was still there, quietly stacking her blocks, while Grace sang in that same low, soothing tone. The next morning, when David came down for breakfast, he heard it again, the faint hum of Grace's song coming from the playroom. Lily was sitting in the same spot as the day before, her bunny in her lap. This time, she was turned ever so slightly toward Grace. David noticed something else. The stiffness in Lily's shoulders seemed softer. She wasn't gripping her bunny as tightly. By the third day, something small but extraordinary happened. David walked past the playroom and froze. Grace was singing again, but this time there was another sound beneath her voice, a faint, hesitant hum. He peeked in and saw Lily sitting closer, almost within arm's reach. Her lips were closed, but she was clearly humming along, matching the melody in her own shy way. Grace didn't make a fuss. She didn't say, "Good job," or try to coax more out of her. She simply kept singing, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. David stood there for a long moment, feeling something shift inside him. For years, every interaction with Lily had been a struggle, a game of trying to pull her into his world. But Grace seemed to be doing the opposite. She wasn't trying to drag Lily out. She was stepping quietly into hers. That night, David found himself thinking about it as he worked late in his office. Grace had been in their lives for only a few days, and yet, Lily was different. Not drastically, but noticeably. It was the first time in years he'd felt even a flicker of hope. By the end of the first week, Lily was no longer just humming. She had started to sway gently to the rhythm of Grace's songs. Sometimes, David would hear a small laugh when Grace made a funny face mid-tune. There were no words yet, but there was something better, connection. David began to realize that Grace wasn't just a nanny. She was a bridge. And slowly, Lily was starting to cross it. It happened 3 weeks later. By then, David had grown used to hearing soft melodies drift through the house. Grace sang often, her voice a warm, steady presence that seemed to fill even the coldest corners of the mansion. Sometimes Lily would hum along. Sometimes she would just sit and listen, her eyes half closed as though soaking in every note. But that day, something felt different. David had finished his meeting earlier than expected. For once, he decided not to call in to check on work. Instead, he drove straight home, his car gliding up the long driveway earlier than usual. The mansion was quiet when he stepped inside, no clinking dishes from the kitchen, no chatter from the staff. Just silence until he heard it. Faint, delicate, drifting from the playroom at the end of the hall. Music. At first, he assumed it was Grace singing, as always. But as he moved closer, his brow furrowed. There were two voices. One was deep and rich, Grace's unmistakable tone. The other was high, light, and unsure. It wavered in and out like the flutter of a bird's wings. David's heart began to pound. He walked slowly down the hall, afraid to move too quickly, afraid the sound might vanish. When he reached the playroom door, he didn't barge in. Instead, he pressed his hand to the frame and leaned in, listening. The voices blended in a gentle harmony. Musical note, Mama's here, Daddy's near, the world is safe, no need to fear. Musical note. David's breath caught. He knew that voice. He had imagined it for years, wondered what it might sound like. Now here it was, trembling, yes, but clear enough to slice through every layer of silence that had wrapped itself around his heart. Slowly, he pushed the door open. Inside, the afternoon sun streamed through the big bay windows, painting the carpet in golden light. Lily was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the floor, her small hands clapping softly to the rhythm. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright like two little stars. She sang each word carefully, almost reverently, as if it were a precious secret she was finally ready to share. Grace sat beside her, her head tilted slightly, smiling with quiet pride. She wasn't leading. She was following Lily's pace, letting her set the rhythm. Their voices wove together, creating something more beautiful than any polished performance. David felt his eyes sting. His throat tightened. He had dreamed of this moment, but the reality was so much more powerful. For years, he had thrown money at the problem. Specialists, therapists, fancy programs, toys that promised to stimulate speech. None of it worked. And here, without any of those things, his daughter was singing. Singing. He stepped forward without thinking, and the floorboard beneath him creaked. Lily turned. For a moment, her smile faded, replaced by wide-eyed surprise. The old Lily might have gone quiet immediately, shutting herself back inside her silent world. But this Lily, the Lily who had spent weeks sitting with Grace, listening, humming, learning to trust, she didn't retreat. Instead, she grinned. "Daddy, Daddy," she squealed, scrambling to her feet. Her little socks slid on the carpet as she ran straight into his arms. The words hit him harder than any award, any deal, any accolade he'd ever received. They weren't just sounds, they were proof. Proof that she trusted him. Proof that she wanted him close. Proof that she had found her voice, and she was using it for him. He knelt, scooping her up in his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. "Lily," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You spoke." She giggled, the sound bubbling out of her like it had been waiting for years. "Daddy," she repeated, her little hands gripping his shirt. Grace remained seated on the floor, watching quietly, her smile warm but her eyes misty. David looked at her over Lily's shoulder. "How?" he asked, his voice hushed as if speaking too loudly might undo the magic. Grace shook her head softly. There was never anything wrong with her voice, Mr. Harris. She just needed to feel safe enough to use it. David's chest ached. All those years, all those professionals, and not one of them had said it quite like that. Safe enough. He turned back to Lily. "Say it again," he said gently. She grinned wider. "Daddy." "Again?" he asked, his voice trembling with hope. "Daddy," she shouted this time, her laughter ringing out like tiny bells. David laughed too, a real laugh, the kind he hadn't felt in years. It mixed with hers, creating a sound so full of life it seemed to echo off the walls. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Lily chattered more than she ever had, short phrases, half-finished sentences, bursts of song. She showed him the drawings she had made with Grace, explaining them in her own simple words. She sang the lullaby again, this time letting him try to sing along. David was hopelessly off-key, but Lily only laughed and clapped her hands, urging him to try again. Later, after Lily had gone to bed, David found Grace in the kitchen, sipping tea. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, leaning against the counter. Grace set her cup down. "You don't need to thank me. Just keep showing up for her. That's what matters." David nodded slowly. He realized then that Grace hadn't just given Lily her voice back. She had given him his daughter back. And as he climbed the stairs that night, he could hear it again. The soft sound of Lily singing in her room, her little voice floating down the hallway like a promise that the silence was gone for good. From that day, everything began to change. The house, once quiet, almost heavy with silence, began to breathe again. Every morning, Grace's warm, rich voice floated down the hallways, carrying songs in English and in the lilting African dialect that had first coaxed Lily's voice into the open. Some were gentle lullabies. Others were playful tunes that made Lily squeal with laughter as she tried to keep up. Lily's giggles, real, bubbling, unstoppable, began to fill the air in ways David had never dared to imagine. It wasn't just the sound, it was the life in it. They baked cookies together, the kitchen counter dusted with flour, Lily proudly wearing an oversized apron. She would press cookie cutters into the dough, announcing each shape she made. Star, heart, moon. She loved the moon. She told David it watched over her. On rainy afternoons, they sat by the big bay window, knees tucked up, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. Grace would hum softly, while Lily guessed what shapes the clouds were turning into. "That one's a dragon," she'd say. "And that one's a bunny eating a sandwich." David found himself slowing down. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the constant pull of the office. He started spending entire days at home. Not as David Harris, the millionaire, but simply as Lily's dad. At first, he struggled. The lullabies felt awkward on his lips. His voice cracked on the high notes, and he stumbled over the unfamiliar words in Grace's language. But every time he finished a verse, Lily would clap her hands and giggle. "Again, Daddy," she'd demand. And he would gladly. Evenings were different now. Instead of answering emails late into the night, David would help Lily with puzzles, read her bedtime stories, or sit on the floor coloring with her. He learned her favorite shades, sky blue, lemon yellow, and princess pink, as she called it. One night, after Lily had gone to bed, David found Grace in the living room, folding laundry. The fire crackled softly in the background. "How did you do it?" he asked, genuinely needing to know. "How did you reach her when no one else could?" Grace paused, smoothing out a small sweater before setting it on the pile. She looked up at him with a calm smile. "Children don't always speak when we want them to," she said gently. "They speak when they feel safe, when their heart is ready. I just gave her a song so her heart could open." David stood there for a long moment, letting her words sink in. He realized then how wrong he'd been all those years, thinking he could fix Lily with the right expert, the right treatment, the right price tag. What she needed couldn't be bought. It had to be given, freely, patiently, without expectation. The proof was in the little moments. Like the night they drove home from a family dinner, Lily pressed up against the car window, watching the moon follow them. "Daddy," she said softly, "the moon is coming with us." David smiled, keeping his eyes on the road. "It must like you." She giggled. "It's keeping us safe." That small exchange, ordinary to anyone else, was extraordinary to him. Every word she spoke now felt like a treasure. And then there were the bedtime routines. Lily insisted he tuck her in every night. She would hold his hand until her eyes grew heavy, whispering little stories about her day. Some nights she'd ask for a song, sometimes one of Grace's, sometimes a silly one they made up together. It wasn't lost on David that, in giving Lily her voice, Grace had also given him something else, a second chance at fatherhood. One Sunday afternoon, they were all in the garden. Lily chased butterflies while Grace pruned roses. David watched them, feeling a deep, unfamiliar stillness inside him. Not the cold stillness of grief, but the warm stillness of peace. He knew there was no amount of money that could repay Grace for what she had given him. She hadn't just done her job, she had changed the course of their lives. But he also knew this: he would never again let business or pride keep him from the people he loved most. Because sometimes the greatest riches aren't in bank accounts or properties or investments. Sometimes they are found in moments so simple you almost miss them: a child's laughter, a hand in yours, a voice calling, "Daddy," in the soft light of evening. And for David, that sound would forever be the most valuable thing in the world. If Lily's first words touched your heart, imagine how many lives we can touch together. Tap like if you believe in miracles, subscribe for more stories that inspire, and tell me in the comments, what's the most beautiful thing you've ever heard?